All right, if you have your copy of Scripture, we're going to be in the book of Judges. That's in the Old Testament, Judges chapter 19, and we're going to be wrapping up the book of Judges tonight. And so just as a recap, just to make sure we're all on the same page as we jump in tonight, the book of Judges has basically been really the phrase that kind of gives you the idea of the entire book is that people did what was right in their own sight. Everyone did what was right in their own sight. And so if you ever wonder what a world would look like when we just do what we want to do all the time and we just throw off God's commands and we throw off his word and we just decide, hey, we're going to decide what's right and wrong and what's good and not, read the book of Judges. And we've gone through a horror show, 18 chapters of a horror show to watch people do despicable and horrible and evil things. Last week we started chapter 17 and 18. That was this is kind of the end of the book, and so it kind of answers the question for us: how did it get so bad? Like, why are things so bad in the nation of Israel? And we were presented with a priest. He was the first thing that we saw. And so we talked about that. Everyone does what's right in their own eyes, but we saw a priest that was pulled in idolatry. In chapter 17, he walked away from the service of God, went into, took an employee by a personal person, went to his house, became his personal priest, and began doing all these things. And here's the thing that we need to see. When we look at the 16 chapters before this, we're seeing regular people in Israel making really horrible decisions. And you think, well, how does that happen? How do they get there? Well, when your spiritual leaders are doing the same thing that you're doing, it makes it very difficult. Now, I want to say this. This doesn't let you off the hook. If you had or have had in your life, maybe still having in your life, bad spiritual leaders, that doesn't let you off the hook. It doesn't let you off the hook for listening to God yourself and applying God's word for yourself. You're not going to be able to go to heaven and go, well, Michael said this and Michael did this and that's why I did this. And God's going to be like, well, didn't you have the Bible? Right? But here's the thing though. When you don't have the spiritual influence in your life that's calling you back and holding you accountable and saying, this is what God has said, this is what God desires, we need to, follow along with that, it really makes things difficult. And so we have this priest walking away from God, walking away from the calling that God has given him to do whatever he wanted to do. And then we meet a guy in chapter 18, or in chapter 17, this guy that is living this way, brings the priest in his house. Then we see an entire group of people do this. We hear about the Danites, and they have the subtle pull of jealousy. And what happens with these people is they just decided to do what was right in their own sight. The first thing they decided to do was God had told them to go in and take this certain piece of land that had people in it and get rid of them and go and settle that. That's your inheritance in the promised land. And they just said, no, not going to do it. And so they lived for a long time without a home, and they started complaining. God, why don't we have a home? God, why haven't you given us our inheritance? God, why haven't you done this? And why haven't you done this? And it's like, well, God did everything he was supposed to do. You didn't. And so instead of choosing God's way, they chose the easy way. And what we read last week, the easy way was to go to people that were distant relatives to them and murder them and burn their city down and take it over. That was the easy way. We'll just take what somebody else has. We're not gonna do what God's asked us to do. We're not gonna put the work in to follow him. We're just gonna go over here and beat up on these people that we know we can beat up on and just take their stuff. Easy way. Now, I told you last week that it gets worse. And tonight we're gonna be dealing with some pretty graphic consequences of sin. And you're gonna really be faced with the question, like, how did we get to this place? And we're gonna work through that tonight. And so just know up front that, this is, and we'll talk about this too, just because this is included in God's word does not mean that God condones what's happening here. God is helping us to see when we, to answer the question, what does it look like when people just get rid of God, they get rid of his commandments, they don't choose to follow him, what does that world look like? And he says, well, I want you to see what that looks like. Now, we're going to pick up in our story in chapter 19, and we're going to be talking about another Levite, another priest, and this guy is worse than the first. So let's pick up in chapter 19. And as always, if you guys have questions or comments or discussion, this is what we're here for. We're in a no rush, so please ask questions. We'd love to interact. So here we go. Hold on to your seat because it's going to get bumpy. Judges chapter 19. Now it came about in those days when there was no king in Israel, there was a certain Levite staying in the remote part of the hill country of Ephraim, who took a concubine for himself from Bethlehem in Judah. But his concubine played the harlot against him, and she went away from him to her father's house in Bethlehem in Judah, and was there for a period of 4 months. Then her husband arose and went after her to speak tenderly to her in order to bring her back, taking with him his servant and a pair of donkeys. So she brought him into her father's house, and when the girl's father saw him, he was glad to meet him. His father-in-law, the girl's father, detained him and begged that he remain with him for 3 days. And they ate and drank and lodged there. On the 4th day, they got up early in the morning, and he prepared to go. And the girl's father said to his son-in-law, "Sustain yourself with a piece of bread, and afterward you may go." So both of them sat down and ate and drank together, and the girl's father said to the man, "Please be willing to spend the night, and let your heart be merry." The man arose to go, but his father-in-law urged him, so that he spent the night there again. On the 5th day, he arose to go early in the morning. And the girl's father said, "Please sustain yourself and wait until afternoon." So both of them ate. When the man arose to go along with his concubine and servant, his father-in-law, the girl's father, said to him, "Behold, the day has drawn to a close. Please spend the night. Lo, the day is coming to an end. Spend the night here, that your heart may be merry. Then tomorrow you may arise early for your journey, so that you may go home." But the man was not willing to spend the night, so he arose and he departed and came to a place opposite Jebus, which is Jerusalem. And there with him were a pair of saddled donkeys. His concubine was also with him. When they were near Jebus, the day was almost gone, and the servant said to his master, "Please come, let us turn aside into the city of the Jebusites and spend the night in it." However, his master said to him, "We will not turn aside into the city of foreigners, who are not of the sons of Israel, but we will go on as far as Gibeah." He said to his servant, "Come and let us approach one of these places, and we will spend the night in Gibeah or Ramah." So they passed along, went their way, and the sun set on them near Gibeah, which belongs to Benjamin. They turned aside there in order to enter and lodge in Gibeah. When they entered, they sat down in the open square of the city, for no one took them into their house to spend the night. Then behold, an old man was coming out of the field from his work at the evening, and the man was from the hill country of Ephraim, and he was staying in Gibeah, but the men of the place were Benjamites. He lifted up his eyes, and he saw the traveler in the open square of the city, and the old man said, "Where are you going? Where do you come from?" He said, "We're passing from Bethlehem in Judah to the remote part of the hill country of Ephraim, I'm from there. And I went to Bethlehem in Judah, but I am now going to my house, and no man will take me into his house. Yet there's both straw and fodder for our donkeys, and bread and wine for me, your maidservant, and the young man who's with your servants. There's no lack of anything." The old man said, "Peace to you. Only let me take care of all your needs. However, do not spend the night in the open square." So he took him into his house and gave the donkeys fodder, and they washed their feet and ate and drank. And while they were celebrating, behold, the men of the city, certain worthless fellows, surrounded the house, pounding on the door. And they spoke to the owner of the house, the old man, saying, "Bring out the man who came into your house, that we may have relations with him." Then the man, the owner of the house, went out to them and said to them, "No, my fellows, please do not act so wickedly. This man has come into my house. Do not commit this act of folly. Here's my virgin daughter and his concubine. Please let me bring them out to you, that you may ravish them and do to them whatever you wish, but do not commit such an act of folly against this man." But the man would not listen to him. So the man seized his concubine and brought her out to them, and they raped her and abused her all night until morning, and they let her go as dawn approached. As the day began to dawn, the woman came and fell down at the doorway of the man's house where her master was until daylight. When her master arose in the morning and opened the door of the house and went out to go on his way, behold, his concubine was lying at the doorway at the house, on the house with her hands on the threshold. He said, "Get up and let's go." But there was no answer. He placed her on the donkey, and the man rose and went to his home. When he entered his house, he took a knife and laid hold of his concubine and cut her in 12 pieces, limb by limb, and sent her throughout the territory of Israel. All who saw it said, "Nothing like this has ever happened or been seen from the day when the sons of Israel came up from the land of Egypt to this day. Consider it, take counsel, and speak up." Told you it was about to get bumpy, right? So here's what we have. We have a Levite who took a concubine. Now, I don't believe it's the same Levite as we talked about in the earlier chapter, or would have said this is Micah's priest, and it's not the same guy. And so what we have is this Levite who is living in Ephraim. He's not where he's supposed to be. He's not near the temple. The temple wasn't born. He's not near the tabernacle and doing his priestly duties. He's living elsewhere. Now, he also does something else. He decides to take a concubine. Now, a concubine is not actually a wife. This is not the same status as an actual wife. A concubine is more like a mistress. And here this guy is, possibly already married. He has a concubine, a mistress, and he's breaking God's commands. He's defiling the sacredness of marriage. God has made it clear that marriage is between one man and one woman, and he's like, that's not enough for me. I would like somebody else. And he takes her as a concubine. So here's the thing. She has no rights as a wife. She has no rights to protection. She has no rights to anything. She just has to be with him at his beck and call. That's why later on in the passage it calls him her master, because that's really what he is. So he takes this concubine. Well, as it happens, this concubine decides that this guy isn't enough for her, and so she heads back to Bethlehem, where she's from, and becomes a harlot. Now, we don't know if she actually takes up that profession, or if she just goes and commits adultery with other guys in Bethlehem. But either way, she's having sex outside of marriage with other people, and she has left this guy. Now, here's the funny thing about this, and it's really not funny, but here's the funny thing about this, is that what's happening in this situation is exactly what the people of Israel have been doing in this entire book. The woman in this situation is doing exactly what the people of Israel have done. God provides a home, God provides commandments, God provides all these blessings, and they run off to find anybody else that they can to have relationships with. And here's this guy, he decides after 4 months, and there's a whole lot that you could explore there, but it's funny to me that, he doesn't immediately go after her. He waits 4 months. He lets her go and do what she does for 4 months, and then he decides to go get her. And if you listen to how this goes, I don't know if he's going to get her because he wants her back home, or if he's going to get her because he's mad that his property has left. But either way, he decides to do that. So after 4 months, and finds out that she is at her father's house. And her father really, in this whole scenario, her father seems kind of like a stand-in for how God would be with the people of Israel. Did you see the father? He was so happy to have her come home. He was so happy to have this guy show up to want to take care of her and be with her. And the father's basically like, just stay with me. Just stay here. He keeps them for 4 days, and then they were wanting to go, and he's like, let's do another day, and the guy stays, and then he's like, let's do another day. Like, he wants to provide for them. And here's the thing. He brought them in, he gave them food, he did all these kind of things, and here's the thing. The priest can't wait to get back to his life. And that's really what's happened in this entire book, and that's what happens to us as people, right? The people of Israel, God would bring them in. He would rescue them from their sin. He would bring them in and provide for them and do all these things. And he's saying, just stay with me, just stay with me, just stay with me. And they could not wait to get out of there and go back to the life that they lived. There's a big lesson there that we need to look at for us. We do the same thing, right? So here's this Levite. He has a concubine. She ran away and played the harlot. Her father took her in. They come to get her. Now here's the thing. They've decided, okay, we're going to go. Now, this guy makes some really, really bad decisions. Here's the decision. He basically accepts all the food and all the help that the father gives, and then he's decided, okay, it's now time for me to leave. And the father says, listen, it's too late. It's too late for you to go. Now, I know this isn't going to sound like a lot of space to cover because we're not traveling the way they did, but where he was heading from Bethlehem back to Ephraim was probably going to be about 10 miles, right? And we think, big deal, like it's 10 minutes. 10 miles was almost a day's journey for them, walking and traveling by donkey and these kind of things. And here's the things. They didn't have lighted roads. They didn't have good roads. They didn't have safe roads. If you take off on a journey that's an entire day's journey and you're taking off in the afternoon to do that, it means that most of the journey is going to be at night. And that's not a great way to travel. And these roads are full of people who are looking to overtake you and to rob you and to leave you for dead. And the father's just saying, don't go. This is a bad choice. And the guy says, no, we're going. So he takes off. Now, they get to Jerusalem, which is a very short distance away. It's probably 4 or 5 miles, so they're kind of covered about half their trip, and it's kind of starting to get late in the day, and the servant says, let's stop here. Now, it wasn't called Jerusalem at that time because the Jebusites still had it because the people of Israel had not pushed them out. But they said, let's stop here. And here's what the guy says. I'm not stopping in a town full of foreigners. Not doing it. I don't trust them. You know, they're going to rob us blind. They're going to kill us. I'm not going to stop in a town full of foreigners. We're going to go to a town full of our people. So we're going to press on, and we're going to go to Gibeah. And that's what they did, Gibeah or Ramah. So they get to Gibeah, and they get there, and they unload all of their stuff in the city square. And they're at the water fountain. They're watering their donkeys, and this is where business was conducted. This is where you would go to get supplies and take care of everything. It's the center of town. Now, there's a phrase that comes up a couple of times in this that is kind of foreign to us. So it says that they stop and they unload and they do these things, and no one takes them into their house. Did you catch that? And the first time I read that, I'm like, well, why would they? Like, I'm not driving down Main Street looking for people like, yo, come stay the night. Like, that's not what I'm looking to do. Well, we live in a completely different custom than they did. Part of the custom that they lived under at that time, and still happens in Middle Eastern homes, is if you are in town, it is the town's responsibility to show you hospitality. Basically, it is a responsibility. If they see a traveler, to say, hey, do you have somewhere to go? If you don't, come stay with me. Now, remember, they skipped the foreigner town to go to their hometown. This wasn't his hometown, but home people, right? These are Israelites. None of the Israelites are helping. They're passing by. They don't care that he's here. They don't care that he doesn't have a place to stay, and nobody's offering. Now, there's an old fella coming home from work that day. He'd been working in the fields, and he comes into town, and he sees these people there, and he recognizes that this is not a good situation because he's lived in this town. Now, and I love how this guy does. He doesn't really come right out and say, you're in danger. He doesn't say that. But he comes to them and he says, who are you? Where are you coming from? Where are you going? What's going on? And they tell him, well, we went to Bethlehem, and now we're heading back to Ephraim, and that's where the guy's from. And he's like, yeah, I totally know that. And then he says, listen, come stay with me. The guy's like, no. I got all the straw. We got all the stuff we need for our donkeys. We got wine and cheese and food and stuff. We got all the stuff. We can just stay right here. It's totally okay. And the guy was like, that's not a good idea. Come and stay at my house. Now remember, who are the people that they're with right now? Israelites. Who was he scared of? Foreigners. Because those foreigners aren't going to take care of us. And those foreigners are not going to treat us well. So it's already not going good when he's with his own people, right? They haven't helped him. They haven't talked to him, haven't done anything. And so we get to verse 20. For the man says, peace to you. Don't let me take care of all your needs. Do not spend the night in the open square. He took them into his house, gave the donkeys fodder, washed their feet, and ate and drank, and they celebrated. Now, what happened here is this guy gave them the best hospitality you could get. Not only did he give them a place to stay, but he comforted them and refreshed them, you know. Again, this isn't something that we would pick up normally, but when you're walking all day in sandals, your feet get pretty nasty, right? And get tired. And so what happened is this guy showed them a really wonderful courtesy. He got down and he washed their feet to bring refreshment to them and welcome them into his home, gave them food, and they celebrated. Now, you could imagine that they felt like, well, this is exactly the kind of treatment I expected from my people. This is exactly what I expected from my people. And then things take a really nasty turn. The men of the city, we don't know all men, but it says worthless people, surrounded on the house, started pounding on the door, and the owner came out. And the guy had to have an idea of what's going on. I mean, could you imagine that? Like, you're sitting around the table, everything's going well, you're celebrating, you're having a good time, you're unwinding from traveling all day long, you're finally going to get to rest, and then this pounding on the door. And it's probably a lot louder than that because it wasn't one guy, it was probably a lot of guys pounding on the door. And the guy goes to the door, and here's the request that his people made against him. Bring this guy out, and we're going to rape him. We're going to have relations with him. Now, that's shocking, right? I mean, we almost don't even want to talk about it in polite company, right? In mixed company. But here's the reality. This is how far the people of Israel had descended. This is almost exactly, word for word, what happened in Sodom and Gomorrah. almost exactly. And what happened in that is this kind of parallels what God is showing us here is how far people go when they throw off God's commands and they do what is right in their own eyes. In fact, when we find out in Genesis 19, it says that the wickedness of Sodom was so great that the stench of their evil raised itself to heaven. And here we see it again. Did these people have they not heard the story of Sodom and Gomorrah? They should, because, they had the books of Moses. They would know. And here they are. They didn't even ask who this guy was. They didn't ask where he was from. They just decided, this is what we want to do. And listen to this guy. I mean, the guy that owns the house seems like a really great guy, doesn't he? He came and take them in. He fed them. He's washed their feet. They're celebrating. They're doing all these kind of things. And when faced with this evil, this is what the guy says. Verse 23, the owner of the house, went out to them and said to them, "No, my fellows, please do not act so wickedly, since this man has come into my house. Do not commit this act of folly. Here is my virgin daughter and his concubine. Please let me bring them out to you, that you may ravish them and do to them whatever you wish. But do not commit this act against him." I mean, it kind of takes your breath away, doesn't it? Like, this guy's only solution is, well, I know that if I come out and try to reason with you, you're not going to listen. And maybe he's thinking, if I stand here any longer, you might decide that you want to do that to me. Here's my solution. I'll give you my daughter and his concubine, and y'all can do whatever you want. Again, here's the thing we need to hear. Just because the Bible contains this does not mean that God condones this. In no shape, form, or fashion. But this is where we are. This is what happens when people throw off all these things and they do what is right in their own sight. And it isn't funny. What was the thing that the guy said? Let me take care of you. And here's how I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to throw my daughter and your concubine to the wolves. So they get in an argument, and the men would not listen. And so here's the thing. The man, the priest, the Levite, seizes his concubine, grabs her, because I'm guessing they're all standing at the door listening to this conversation. These guys would not listen. They would not give in. So here's what he does. He just grabs her, and he throws her out the door, and they lock the door. And then they go to bed. Let that sink in for a moment. How in the world do you, in good conscience, 1, throw her out there, 2, lock the door, and 3, go to bed? Go to bed. And the men of the city do what they came to do. They thoroughly raped and abused and just destroyed this woman completely to the point that she died. Her last act was crawling back to the house. She made it as far as right at the door. It says her hand was on the threshold. Like, she made it to the door. Her hand was on the door. And morning dawns, and this guy gets up well rested and refreshed, has some breakfast, gets some coffee. Hey, it's time to go. And he throws open the door, walks right over her and says, "Get up, let's go." And she doesn't move. No, it doesn't say anything that he checked her, that he wept over what happened to her. He was angry. He picks her up, puts her on the donkey, and they head home. And when they get home, this is what blows me away. When they get home, this guy does an even worse act of defiling her than what they did. He doesn't bury her. He doesn't have a funeral for her. He doesn't cry over her. He cuts her up into pieces and ships her off to the other tribes, the 12 tribes of Israel, and says, "What are you going to do about this?" Now, here's a phrase in here that makes me laugh just because it's so awful. Listen to what it says in verse 30. All who saw it said, "Nothing like this has ever happened or been seen from the day when the sons of Israel came up from the land of Egypt to this day." Really? We've seen some pretty horrible, terrible, nasty stuff in the book of Judges. And then they're saying, "Oh, we just don't know how to feel about this." Everybody just starts to clutch their pearls. "Oh no, this has hurt my personal feelings." Really? This is what it is? You don't care about mass murder. You don't care about genocide. You don't care about rape. You don't care about all the other things that have happened for generations. You're okay with all that. This, though, well, this is what got you. So, what happens is the story gets worse. Can you believe this? the story gets worse. Because what happens is we now have misplaced anger and sickening solutions. Now remember, when you're doing what's right in your eyes and you're not asking God what he wants you to do, when you come up with solutions, they're not godly solutions. And here's what we're going to find out, what they do. He sends her body pieces out, and people are shocked, and they decided to get together to decide what they're going to do. Verse 20, or chapter 20. All the sons of Israel, from Dan to Beersheba, including the land of Gilead, came out, and the congregation assembled as one man to the Lord at Mizpah. The chiefs of all the people, even of all the tribes of Israel, took stand in the assembly of the people of God, 400,000 soldiers who drew the sword. It's a lot of people. This is not counting everybody. This is just the soldiers, 400,000 people. Now the sons of Benjamin heard that the sons of Israel had gone up to Mizpah, and they didn't come. Now remember, this happened in a city in the land of Benjamin, right? So these would be family members of the people of Benjamin. The sons of Israel said, "Tell us, how did this wickedness take place?" I love that. We just don't understand how this happened. So the Levite, the husband of the woman, now he's a husband now, not her master. She's his wife, not his concubine. Answered and said, "I came with my concubine to spend the night at Gibeah, which belongs to Benjamin. But the men of Gibeah rose up against me and surrounded the house at night because of me, and they intended to kill me. Instead, they ravished my concubine so that she died. I took hold of my concubine and cut her in pieces and sent her throughout the land of Israel's inheritance, for they have committed a lewd and disgraceful act in Israel. Behold, all you sons of Israel, give your advice and counsel here." All the people arose as one man, saying, "Not one of us will go to his tent, nor any of us return to our house. But now this is the thing which we will do to Gibeah. We will go up against it by lot. We will take 10 men out of 100 through the tribes of Israel, and 100 out of 1,000, and 1,000 out of 10,000, to supply food for the people, that when we come to Gibeah of Benjamin, they may punish them for all the disgraceful acts they've committed in Israel." Thus all the men of Israel were gathered against the city, united as one man. Then the tribes of Israel sent men through the entire tribe of Benjamin, saying, "What is this wickedness that has taken place among you? Now then, deliver up the men, the worthless fellows in Gibeah, that we may put them to death and remove this wickedness from Israel." But the sons of Benjamin would not listen to the voice of their brothers, the sons of Israel. The sons of Benjamin gathered from the cities to Gibeah to go out to battle against Israel. From the cities on that day, the sons of Benjamin were numbered, 26,000 men who draw the sword, beside the inhabitants of Gibeah, who were numbered 700. Out of all these people, 700 choice men were left-handed. Each one could sling a stone at a hair and not miss. Then the men of Israel, besides Benjamin, were numbered 400,000 men who drew the sword. All these were men of war. So we're lining up for a pretty nice civil war. But it also looks like it's going to be pretty quick. The numbers, when you have 400,000 on one side and you got 26,700 on the other, that's not good numbers. It's like 5-1 odds. Or actually more than that. It's like 200-1, something. Now, verse 18, now the sons of Israel rose, went up to Bethel, inquired of God, and said, "Who shall go up for us first to battle against the sons of Benjamin?" And the Lord said, "Judah shall go first." So the sons of Israel rose in the morning and camped against Gibeah. The men of Israel went out to battle against Benjamin, and the men of Israel arrayed for battle against them. The sons of Benjamin came out of Gibeah and felled to the ground, or killed, on that day 22,000 men of Israel. But the people, the men of Israel, encouraged themselves and arrayed for battle again in the place where they had arrayed the first day. The sons of Israel went up and wept before the Lord until evening, and inquired of him, saying, "Shall we go again for battle against the sons of my brother Benjamin?" And the Lord said, Go against them. So the sons of Israel went against the sons of Benjamin the second day. Benjamin went out against them again. And that day they killed 18,000 people of Israel. Then all the sons of Israel and all the people went up to Bethel and wept. Thus they remained there before the Lord and fasted that day until evening. And they offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord. The sons of Israel inquired of the Lord, for the ark of the covenant was there in those days. And Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, Aaron's son, stood before it to minister in those days, saying, "Shall we go again to battle against the sons of my brother Benjamin, or shall we cease?" And the Lord said, "Go up, for tomorrow I will deliver them into your hand." So Israel set men in ambush around Gibeah. The sons of Israel went up against the sons of Benjamin on the third day, arrayed themselves against them. The sons of Benjamin went out against the people and were drawn away from the city, and they began to strike and kill some of the people as at other times, on the highways and one of the roads which goes up from Bethel, and the others in Gibeah in the field. About 30 men of Israel. The sons of Benjamin said, "They're struck down before us as at the first." But the sons of Israel said, "Let us flee, that we may draw them away from the city to the highways." All the men of Israel arose from their place and arrayed themselves at Baal-Tamar. And the men of Israel in ambush broke out of their place, even out of Maragaba. When 10,000 choice men from Israel came against Gibeah, the battle became fierce. But Benjamin did not know that disaster was on them. The Lord struck Benjamin before Israel, so that the sons of Israel destroyed 25,100 men of Benjamin that day, all who draw the sword. So the sons of Benjamin saw that they were defeated. When the men of Israel gave ground to Benjamin, because they relied on the men in the ambush whom they had set against Gibeah, the men in ambush hurried and rushed against the city. The men in ambush deployed and struck all the city with the edge of the sword. Now the appointed sign between the men of Israel and the men in ambush is they would make a great cloud of smoke rise from the city. The men of Israel turned in battle, and Benjamin began to strike and kill about 30 men of Israel, for they said, "Surely they're defeated before us, as in the first battle." But when the cloud began to rise from the city, a column of smoke, Benjamin looked behind them, and behold, the whole city was going up in smoke to heaven. Then the men of Israel turned, and the men of Benjamin were terrified, for they saw that disaster was close to them. Therefore they turned their backs before the men of Israel toward the direction of the wilderness, but the battle overtook them, while those who came out of the cities destroyed them in the midst of them. They surrounded Benjamin, pursued them without rest, and trod them down opposite Gibeah toward the east. Thus 18,000 men of Benjamin fell. All these were valiant warriors. The rest turned and fled toward the wilderness of the rock of Rimmon, but they caught 5,000 of them and overtook them at Gihon and killed 2,000 of them. So all of Benjamin who fell that day were 25,000 who draw the sword, and all these were valiant warriors. But 600 men turned and fled toward the wilderness to the rock of Rimmon, and they remained at the rock for 4 months. The men of Israel then turned back against the sons of Benjamin, struck them with the edge of the sword, both the entire city with the cattle and all that they found. They set on fire in the cities which they found. So, here's what happens. The Levite sends out the pieces of his concubine. They have a big family meeting. They bring in all the tribes except Benjamin. Everybody's upset. They start with the first question: how could this have happened? Well, the thing that I want to stop before we answer that question is, how can anyone be angry at this story? How can anyone in this situation act like they're innocent? Act like that they're a victim? Act like that they didn't have some hand in this? It's so funny that they just forget all of the sin and all of the heinous acts that they've done before God and how they've lived, and this is the thing they can rally around and say, this is bad. Well, yeah, it's bad, I agree. But how can anybody in this scenario, especially the Levite, like this guy's mad that she got raped and abused and killed, but he wasn't mad enough not to cut her up. He wasn't mad enough not to throw her out to the wolves, and now he's here going, y'all need to do something. Y'all need to take care of this. So they say, how did this happen? Well, how did this wickedness take place? It took place because everybody's doing what's right in their own eyes. This Levite did what was right in his eyes. The people of the city did what was right in their eyes. He threw her out. They destroyed her. Now he cuts her up and sends her around because that's what's right in his eyes. And now we've gathered together to make a decision, and here's what's right. Here's what they decide. Now they said that they're inquiring of God, but God never says this to them. Here's what they say. We're going to go destroy Benjamin. Not we're going to go destroy Gibeah. We're going to go destroy Benjamin because this is where it happened, and they're responsible for it. So here's our solution. We're going to go kill some folks. Seems like you're doing what is right in your own eye. And I think the Bible says something about not taking an eye for an eye. Somewhere. It might be in a footnote somewhere, but I think it's there, right? But this is what they decide to do. And here's the funny thing. The Levite doesn't even tell all of the story, does he? He centers all the story on himself. How many times do you hear I, me, my? The story was, they're going to come kill me. Notice he left out the part where they wanted to rape him. He didn't say anything about that. They just wanted to kill him. And they took his concubine instead. Well, did they take her? No, they didn't take her. He threw her to him. So they ravished my concubine so that she died. I love how he phrases that, right? Well, I mean, they ravished her and she died. They tried to kill me, she just died. So he doesn't give all of the story. He doesn't tell everything that's going on here. And, nobody says anything about when he says, and I cut her up and sent her to you. Like there was nobody in the crowd that day that said, hey, I got a question. Why did you cut her up? Like that's not what we do to people. Why'd you do that? Nobody said a question. Nobody asked a question about that. And now his question is, what are you going to do? What are you going to do about this? And here's what they decide. Bad solution, number one, lynch mob justice. Super bad solution. We're going to handle this ourselves. We know what to do. They got 400,000 troops. We're just going to go right out and we're going to take care of this. Now look, I understand when we are faced with something as egregious as this, I know our gut response is they deserve it and we need to go and bring pain to them and we need to, show them how terrible and awful this is. I get that. Totally understand that. Lynch mob justice is not what God wants for us. Romans 12, God says never take revenge, never pay back vengeance. Vengeance is mine. Because the problem is we don't do justice, we do vengeance. And we don't do justice because we never pay back somebody what that's owed. It's always over. And you're going to see what happens. They way overdo vengeance in this story. So they decide and they grab everybody together. They make this plan on how they're going to send everybody in. And we've got food provisions and we've got, rested warrior provisions. We got all this plan together and we're going to go destroy these people. And they get there. And they roll up for battle, 400,000 to 26,700. And they get to the first battle, and 22,000 people die. Nobody in Gibeah and nobody in Benjamin. 22,000 people of Israel die. Because here's the thing, God's definitely got to be on our side. God's definitely got to be okay with what we're doing. God would want us to go in and destroy these people because they're terrible, and we can't allow this to happen in Israel. Really? Because you've sacrificed babies to Molech, because you've had orgies under every tree, because you're worshiping other gods, because you've taken on multiple wives and concubines. I mean, this is the one evil you decide to pick? Really? 22,000 people die. Now they're a little scared. And they back up a little bit. And they inquire of God and say, God, should we go again? God's like, yeah, go again. 18,000 more people die. Now you got to think, these people are going, God, this doesn't make any sense. We're doing this for you. We're doing this in your name. We're doing this to protect you. We're doing this because this is wrong. And they go again, and they weep, and they pray, and they fast, and they do all these things. Should we go again? And God says, yes, go again. And in the third battle, God says he's going to deliver the people into their hands, and they do. And they killed 25,100 people so that only 600 of them are left. Now, this is interesting to me because it's like, God, why are you doing this? Why are you talking to them? Why are you entertaining this? God, why did you let them keep fighting? Well, I think, as we've talked about before, we've seen God, with the guy who decided he was going to make a vow to God, and God, if you let me win the battle, I'll sacrifice whatever comes out of my house to you, and his daughter came out, right? What's happening is God is basically allowing these people to stay in the relationship they have with God. Now, I'm using air quotes for relationship because they have no relationship because they're doing what's right in their own eyes. And God is basically saying, you want to go fight? Go fight. If that's what you think is right and that's what you want to do, you're not really asking for my opinion, you're asking for my permission. And we got to be careful about that, because how many times in our prayer life are we asking for permission and not God's opinion? We frame it as, God, we want your opinion, but really we've already decided what we want to do. Now we just want you to say it's okay. And so God says, go do it. And look at all the carnage that happens here. So here's the thing we need to look at. God does not condone this. God is not okay with this. What God is trying to help them see is this is the consequence of what happens when you do what you want to do. And this is the consequence to the actions of sin. Sin have consequences, both for the people of Gibeah and for the people of Israel. Like, you can't as a city think it's okay. And here's the deal. You know, we read this and we're shocked by it. And I hate to bring this up again, but here's the reality. This probably wasn't the first time that this happened in the city of Gibeah. Probably not the first time. You know, because this had probably become where the city was, and this is what happened, and this is why the man was like, you should not sleep outside. You should not. So, this happens, and they almost completely wipe out an entire tribe of Israel. And God had promised, when he brought the people in, that no tribe would ever be wiped out. So we got a problem now, right? We took this into our hands, and it went way too far, and we've killed 25,100 men, but they also burnt the city to the ground. They also put everybody else to the edge of the sword, and now there's no nation of Benjamin, 600 guys. That's it. Now, we're going to get to Judges 21, and then we get bad solution number 2. They take a breath after this crazy example of what they've done, and here's what they say. Now the men of Israel had sworn in Mizpah, saying, none of us shall give his daughter to Benjamin in marriage. They were so mad that not only were they going to kill them, but if anybody survived, they weren't going to give them daughters so that the tribe could survive. And they made a vow before God, this is what we're going to do. We are not going to give them daughters to marry. Now here's the problem. God had already prohibited from all of these nations from marrying outside nations because he didn't want them mixing with the religions of other nations. And so these guys are pretty much stuck. They can't replenish their tribe because they can't marry anybody else from any other tribes because they said they won't give them wives. And they can't marry outside because that would, ruin them as a tribe. So it sounds like Benjamin's about to die. And so here's what they say. Hey, we made this vow. So the people came to Bethel and sat there before God until evening, and they lifted up their voices and they wept bitterly. They said, why, O Lord God of Israel, has this come about in Israel so that one tribe should be missing? It came about the next day that the people arose early and built an altar and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings. And the sons of Israel said, who is here among all the tribes of Israel who did not come up in the assembly to the Lord? For they had taken another vow concerning those who did not come up to the Mizpah. And they said, he shall surely be put to death. Sons of Israel were very sorry for their brother Benjamin and said, one tribe's cut off from Israel today. What shall we do for wives for those who are left, since we've sworn by the Lord not to give them any of our daughters in marriage? They said, what one is there of the tribes of Israel who did not come up to us at Mizpah? Behold, no one had come from the camp of Jabesh Gilead to the assembly. For when the people were numbered, behold, not one of the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead was there. And the congregation sent 12,000 of the valiant warriors there and commanded them, saying, go and strike the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead with the edge of the sword, and the women and the little ones. This is the thing that you shall do. You shall utterly destroy every man and every woman who was lain with a man. And they found among the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead 400 young virgins who had not known a man by lying with him. And they brought them to the camp at Shiloh, which is in the land of Canaan. The whole congregation sent word and spoke to the sons of Benjamin who were at the rock of Ramon and proclaimed peace to them. Benjamin returned at that time, and they gave the women whom they had kept alive from the women of Jabesh Gilead, yet they were not enough for them. And the people were sorry for Benjamin because the Lord had made a breach in the tribes of Israel. The elders of the congregation said, what shall we do for wives for those who are left, since the women are destroyed out of Benjamin? They said, there must be an inheritance for the survivors of Benjamin, so that a tribe will not be blotted out from Israel. But we cannot give them wives of our daughters. For the sons of Israel had sworn, saying, cursed is he who gives a wife to Benjamin. So they said, behold, there's a feast of the Lord from year to year in Shiloh, which is on the north side of Bethel, on the east side of the highway that goes up from Bethel to Shechem, on the south side of Lebanon. And they commanded the sons of Benjamin, saying, go and lie in wait in the vineyards, and watch. And behold, if the daughters of Shiloh come out and take part in the dances, then you shall come out of the vineyards, and each of you shall catch his wife from the daughters of Shiloh, and go to the land of Benjamin. It shall come about when their fathers or their brothers come to complain to us, we will say to them, give them to us voluntarily, because we did not take for each man of Benjamin a wife in battle, nor did you give them to them, else you would now be guilty. Sons of Benjamin did so, and took wives according to their number from those who danced, whom they carried away, and they went and returned to their inheritance and rebuilt the cities and lived in them. Sons of Israel departed from there at that time, every man to his tribe and family, and each one of them went out from there to his inheritance. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. All right. We are going to end with bad solution number 2, where we go from bad to worse. I want you to see the craziness in this chapter. So they've just finished their slaughter. They go back home, and they're starting, as the adrenaline wears off, they're starting to have some hurt feelings. Can't believe we just did that. I can't believe we just wiped out an entire tribe. I can't believe that there's only 600 of them left. Like, that's just sad, and that's just wrong, and like we need to do something. I feel bad for them. And so they decided to gather together again, and they did, and here's what they said. This really turns my stomach. Look at what it says in 21:3. Why, O Lord God of Israel, has this come about in Israel so that one tribe should be missing today in Israel? God, why'd you let this happen? God, why did you let this happen? Why is one tribe now missing? Why did you do this, God? Dude, you haven't even washed the blood off your hands yet. Like, you have nothing to do? You have nothing to do with this? So, why did this come about? Why is a tribe missing? Like, you kind of want to be, were you not there? Were you not there when y'all had the battles and people died and then you murdered all these people and you burnt down their city? Like, you had no part of that at all? This is God's fault? So, they have this moment of remorse. We need to fix this. We need to help God, because God really blew it here. God really messed up here. And we need to fix this. But we've got a problem. Back when we were super mad, y'all remember a few days ago when we were super mad? And like this was just the worst thing in the world and we just hated everything. Remember that? Remember, we made 2 oaths before God that we have to honor. Funny, we want to honor these 2 and none of the other commandments that God has. But we made 2 oaths before God. Oath number 1, we were so mad at these people because they're so evil and terrible and awful that we vowed that we can never give them a wife.
Then they're saying the tribe's missing.
Yeah, right. Yeah, missing. Like they've just got lost in the woods. Yeah. But we can't give them a wife because, we vowed not to do that. Oh, and in fact, if we find out that you gave them a wife, we'll kill you too. Oh, and vow number 2, remember vow number 2, we were really super mad and we wanted to have everybody come and we were going to go fight together. And we said if anybody didn't show up to the meeting, to the committee on war, meeting, that if you didn't show up, we're going to come burn down your city. Remember we talked about that? Here's a solution. Here's what we're going to do. Can somebody get the minutes from the last meeting and call roll and see which somebody didn't show up? And so they found a little town, and they didn't show up, Jabesh Gilead, and they said, problem solved. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to go kill everybody in the town. That's what we're going to do, because we vowed to do that, and we made a vow to God, and we keep our vows to God, right? We're serious about our vows to God, right, guys? So we're going to go kill them, but let's find virgins for them. Let's do that. But everybody else, got to die. Like, here's your great solution. We're going to go kill more people, right? Not only are we going to go kill more people, we're going to kidnap people and force them into forced marriages, and that's called sex slavery. So we're going to do that too. I mean, not that God said anything about that kind of stuff. Not that God has any commandments that we vowed to keep, like don't kill and don't steal and don't force people into sex slavery. We don't care about those, vows and oaths. But we made vows and we got to keep them. So that's what they do. They go to Jabesh Gilead and they murder everybody there. They find 400 virgins, but here's the problem. There's 600 guys. And we just feel really bad. Isn't it funny how fast their feelings changed? Remember, like some of these 600 may have been some of the guys that were trying to rape the guy and they end up raping the concubine and killing her. But now it's like, we just feel bad for you, man. We feel bad that you're in this mess. Not that we made the mess for you, but you made it and you're here. So what are we going to do? We've only got 400 and we need 600 and they really need more than that if we're going to rebuild that entire nation. So what are we going to do? No, we can't give them wives. Because hang on one second, George. If we give them wives, then we have to kill ourselves because we break our vow. So we got the 400. What do? here's a great idea. You know, every year when we go to Shiloh and we go to worship God and we go to sacrifice to God, you know, we go to renew our commitment to God. Here's what we're going to do. When we go to Shiloh, we're going to let them kidnap women from Shiloh. Now, funny, it's never a city of theirs. It's never from their family. They're so willing to give everybody else's family away, right? Oh, and here's the thing. When they come and they kidnap these women, as they will, and the fathers and the brothers and the families of the city come to us and say, what are you going to do about this? We're going to go, well, you're not in trouble. Don't worry. You didn't willingly give them your daughters, so we're not going to kill you. You should feel good about that, right? And here's the thing. They didn't set a time limit on it. They said every year. Every year when we go, these guys get to go and do this. This is just the way that it is.
Sounds like our government.
True. True. So here's what happens. They basically decide, okay, we've made these horrible oaths that God never asked us to make. God didn't ask for this. God didn't tell them to do this, but they made it. And their whole solution is, how do we get around the oaths that we've made? Because we made this stuff, and now it's come back to bite us, and now we don't want to keep it, but we want to keep it. And so how do we get around it? And that's what they've done. And then it says, you know, and it kind of talks about like foreshadowing that this is what happened, and they would come, and they would steal the wives, and the people would come, and they would be mad, and the elders would just say, at least we're not going to kill you. And then it just says, and they all went home. They all went home. They all went home and they skipped hand in hand, and there was rainbows and there was bunnies and there was Skittles for everybody. It was so beautiful and wonderful because we had handled the problem. And then we come to the last verse again. In those days, there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in his own eyes. This is what it looks like when we're in charge. So some of the things that we need to look at and really deal with is it's easy for us to stand on the sidelines right now when we read this and we are so offended. I can't believe it. This is so awful. Are we really that much different? And we like to tell ourselves, like when we read in the New Testament, we see the Pharisees and we like to think, I'm not like a Pharisee at all. Really? See, here's what happens. God shows us these things not to say that they're right, not to say that we need to do what they did. Here's what he's saying. He puts it in our face and he says, look at this. Look at this. This is what it looks like when you're in charge of your life. Now, we like to rationalize, well, I've never raped anybody. I've never burnt down a city, you know. I haven't killed 25,000 people. No, we've just committed all sorts of other heinous sins. And see, that was what was the problem with these people. They were looking and saying, oh, listen, that thing that happened with a concubine, we've never heard anything like that before. You're right. But that's just the natural conclusion of everything else that you've already heard that you didn't do anything about. And it's really difficult for them to act in these last 3 chapters all holy and righteous and like we're defending God's name. Really? Great way to defend God's name is just to live for his name. George, what questions do you have?
It's funny how when you're doing Bible studies, the Spirit shows you things. Last week I had messaged you a scripture in Proverbs that had to do with that, how Proverbs says that a way may seem right to a man, but the end leads to death. And the other thing you just brought up tonight too, somebody said, that sounds like my government. Well, this here sounds like our religious leaders in America. Because, you know, we're going so crazy about homosexuality, abortion, and yet, because it's so embedded in our culture, when you read Galatians 5:19, we forget fornication, adultery, covetousness, lying. You know, God destroys that just as bad as he destroys everything else.
Sure.
But because it's in our culture, we want to attack it.
Sure.
Which is fine. I mean, yeah, we have to because it is an abomination to God.
Sure.
But we've got to remember that. And you know, a lot of the people say, well, how did we get, like you just said, how did we let this happen? Well, the church didn't step forward, didn't step up when it was going
Well, and I think, I see that, and I think that's an easy, it is easy to blame the church. And kind of like we talked about with the Levite, yeah, he wasn't doing what he was supposed to be doing, but individuals weren't either, And I think for me, like as we look at the book of Judges, the thing that like we talked about at the very beginning, but I want to stress two things. One, I mean, really, this is if anybody wants to, argue that people are just basically good, see, go read the book of Judges. Go read the book of Judges, because you're going to see a lot of things in Judges that you're seeing today. And so when we are in charge, when we have our way, this is what it looks like. I mean, I could name nation after nation where you have one person in control and he gets his way or her way, and it's not good. But here's the thing. In the midst of all this, God is in absolute control of everything. Just because they were going crazy and they were doing all these things, it didn't thwart God's plan. That tribe did not get destroyed. It was still there. God's promise was kept. I mean, all these things happened, and God continued to forgive, and God continued to heal, and God continued to deliver. He did all that kind of stuff. And so I think the thing that we need to see in this is, yes, this is a very bad book full of very bad people, but it's also a testimony to a very good God.
The other thing is, too, it said in the last verse that no king, so that means out of those 600 men and those women is where Saul came. One of those women was Saul's parents.
Yep. Saul was a Benjaminite. That's right. Yeah. And so was the Apostle Paul.
Yeah. And David.
So, yeah. Anybody else?
I noticed in this episode, the men go to God and tell him what they want to do, and God says, okay, go ahead. But he never says, and I will be with you.
He does the last time. He says that I will deliver them into your hands. But that's not condoning what they did.
No.
Anybody else? All right. Well, thank you for coming. Let's pray, and we'll be dismissed. Father, thank you for the time that we've had tonight. Thank you for your word. Help us to be encouraged and challenged by this, to be able to really take this in and really stew on it and think about it and meditate on it and allow you to change us from the inside out. Help us to live out your truth and to share it with others. And God, we thank you so much for all that you do. And we pray that you'll keep us safe and bring us back on Sunday so we can worship you again. In Jesus' name, amen.